Hello, and welcome to Homegrown KC, a podcast dedicated to exploring Kansas City's fascinating history and sharing stories from its rich past. I'm your host, Laura. Joining me today is Dr. Felicia Londré. Nope, I take that back. I just butchered the last name. I'm sorry. Let's go with the English, Londré. Welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. Oh, I love talking about Kansas City's theater.
Well, the first thing I like to ask my guests is if you would tell us your story. Who are you? Where did you come from? And how did you get here?
Well, my father was an Air Force officer and a pilot in World War II. So growing up as an Air Force brat or fledgling, I lived in a lot of different places. When I was little, we had to move every year, and later on we moved once every 3 years. We lived mostly in the West and Midwest and South. I got my BA at Montana. My master's degree at the University of Washington, Seattle, after a Fulbright year in France, and my doctorate at Wisconsin. And then I taught for 6 years in Wisconsin and was casting about it was a 2-year campus, and I wanted to teach in a 4-year campus. I did move up. I taught 3 years at the University of Texas at Dallas, but that was an upper 2-year, and I wanted a 4 years. So I was so lucky to get the job at the University of Missouri, Kansas City, when Patricia McElrath, founder of Missouri Repertory Theater and chair of the Department of Theater at UMKC, hired me to be the first dramaturg. And then I had been teaching dramatic literature, theater history, but I think it's when I came here that I defined myself as a theater historian.
I love how you just very casually threw out that you were a Fulbright scholar for a year. For those who don't know, it's a really big deal in the history profession.
Yes, that was a very formative year, that Fulbright year in France. I had majored in French for my bachelor's degree and Romance languages for my master's degree. And then I switched over to, theater still wasn't even respectable in the 1960s. So when I went to Wisconsin, there was no degree in theater. It was a degree in speech. My doctorate is in speech, but really all the courses I took and all the activity I did on the side, it was all theater.
Interesting.
So, and it's kind of like early history in Kansas City when theater was a bad word. Theater was what cowboys went to see on Saturday night with lots of girls' legs and drinking on the side. When theater buildings were built, they were not called theaters. If they wanted to attract a respectable audience, they were called opera houses. And they could be quite ramshackle, or they could be just a second floor above a grocery store. But if it was called opera house, that meant ladies could safely come attend the shows there.
Right. Well, I want to keep talking about you a little bit more, and then we'll talk more about theater in Kansas City. So what was your thesis for your doctorate?
My PhD thesis was on the production of foreign language plays in American colleges and universities, because I had done that when I was majoring in French and Romance languages and wanting to be in theater. My way of doing it was to get together students to do plays in French. But I later, at Wisconsin, I actually acted in a play in Spanish and directed plays in French. So I had done enough of it, and I realized it was quite a phenomenon. So that's what I wanted to research. And going back to the 19th century, when students did plays in Greek and Latin in order to learn those languages. And but even after we sort of colleges boiled it down to the basic 4 languages: French, Spanish, German, and Italian. Many of them were doing plays, sometimes on their own little amateurish things within the foreign language department, and sometimes in collaboration with the theater department, as I did at Wisconsin. It was a wonderful at Wisconsin when I was a graduate student. I directed a production of The Italian Straw Hat in French in the sort of black box theater. And it was so wildly successful in French that the theater faculty invited me to direct the same play in English on the main stage.
Wow.
So things worked out really nicely for me when I was still a graduate student.
That's really interesting. Theater is so ingrained in colleges today that you don't think about a time when it wasn't.
Yes. Well, I think people were more open to foreign languages in the, well, if I can call it the good old days of the 1960s. But even, I mean, earlier than that, we're looking at the 1880s, that I guess we'll talk about for Kansas City. There was a phenomenon called polyglot productions, when foreign stars who acted in a foreign language would tour with a company, and you might have, say, Bogmil Davison acting in German in a Shakespeare play where everyone else did their lines in English, or Helena Modjeska would tour with a Shakespeare company and give her lines in Polish, and everyone else spoke English. Later, she did learn English and toured in English. And I even saw one when I was teaching in Japan. I saw a polyglot production. It was just so exciting to me because there was a Russian company that came to Tokyo, and they did Romeo and Juliet with the Capulets played by Japanese actors and the Montagues played by Russian actors, each speaking their own language. And of course, every actor knows their Shakespeare, at least the basic Shakespeare plays, in order to know when it's their cue.
Mm-hmm.
Even if they don't understand the person they're speaking to, they know when to speak their line in their own language. It was amazing to see that. It was just beautiful, and especially because it was during the Kuril Islands dispute, when there was some diplomatic edginess between Japan and it was the Soviet Union back then. And so to have the Capulets and Montagues come together at the end, it was just so uplifting.
That does sound really cool.
Yes.
So,
well, we had our very own American actor. We had an African-American actor, Ira Aldridge, in the very early 19th century. I'm hazy on the dates right now, but I'm thinking 1810s, 1820s in there. He performed at the African Grove Theater in New York City, but then went off and had the rest of his career in Europe. Well, he really learned his craft acting in England, but then later he put together his own company, and the best group of actors he could gather together to tour with him was a German company. And so he acted in English with the rest of the company acting in German, and they toured to Russia, Tsarist Russia, and performed for Russian audiences that couldn't tell the difference between the English and the German.
well, when you came to UMKC and were in the theater department, you said that you were the first dramaturg? What is that?
Yes. Back in those days, I came in 1978, and it was right about the time when we were first hearing the word dramaturg. In fact, when the position here was advertised, that to teach dramatic literature and serve as dramaturg for Missouri Repertory Theater on the side, I was unfamiliar with the word. But when I looked it up and saw what it was, I knew I could do it. And it's sort of, there are a lot of different ways of explaining it, and it's kind of the job description often is it depends on the person, what skills the person brings to it and what the theater needs. But it's a kind of a person who does literary resource research. If it's a historical play, the dramaturg might do historical background research, or the dramaturg very often helps in choosing the play. The dramaturg is supposed to be someone well-read who reads a lot of plays. I certainly fit that description, and can suggest plays that the theater ought to be doing that fit the times. And so I had a lot of suggestions. Most of my ideas never got done. They were not always what the audience wanted at the time. But Dr. Patricia McElrath, the artistic director, always took me seriously and listened to my ideas and would always run her choices. Or if she was narrowing down the theater season, she would always run it past me to get my reactions. I think she did that with a lot of people to make us all feel part of the whole process. And then when she was succeeded by George Keithley, he told me, actually several years later, he said, he said when he first came, someone whom he did not name came up to him and said, "Now, don't listen to the plays that Felicia recommends, because she only wants to do plays that lose money."
That's not nice.
He thought that was funny. I think it's funny too. I think it's probably because I'm very much oriented to the great classics, the plays that I think everyone ought to know, that are just part of our cultural heritage, that even if we haven't read the plays, we've grown up with the kinds of ideas and values that are transmitted from one generation to another. And classical plays do tend to have large casts. Mm-hmm. And single greatest expense in mounting a production is the size of the cast. That's why we see so many two-character plays or very, very small plays. So that's certainly a factor. And if I can take this opportunity to get into throw in my current money-losing idea.
Go for it.
Thanks. I really think, given what's going on in the world today in the Ukraine, why isn't somebody doing Miguel de Cervantes' play Numancia? Cervantes, who wrote Don Quixote, one of the most lasting works in the entire world literature. He wrote a major verse play called Numancia. That's the name of the city in Spain that was besieged by Romans. The Romans surrounded the city, and the city refused to surrender. They knew they couldn't hold out because they were cut off from food. And even though they had the high walls they could shoot from, the Romans just dug in and kept the assault up forever. And the play is so beautiful because it even has poetic characters like the river Duero that surrounds the city or flows past the city. And the river comes and speaks in a different poetic voice about, I sympathize with the people of Numancia, but there's nothing I can do. I have to keep flowing. And so you have characters like death, and it's just amazing. And of course, in the end, the Romans do get into the city and they find absolutely every person is dead of starvation except one little boy. And they think, okay, we'll take this little boy home to Rome and show him off as the captive and representative of our triumph, our great triumph. And the little boy throws himself off the walls of the city. So it's very, very powerful. And it's all in verse. I've toyed with the idea of translating it, but it's very, very difficult. I'd have to give up other things that I'm working on. But there are a couple of English translations of it. But anyway, it's something that has been done several times in France. Jean-Louis Barrault did it in the 30s when it was pertinent for what was about to happen, with World War II. Mm-hmm. So I just think somebody ought to realize we need a production of Numancia because of the great parallels with what's happening in Ukraine and with the Russians surrounding it and mercilessly attacking.
Yeah, I can see that. I can see how it would be very, it would have a powerful message relating to today. That's cool that
Yeah.
you
Well, oh,
try to
thanks
make
for
that
giving me
connection.
that little opportunity for there's no director I can really unleash that on, so maybe this will help.
Are there other projects that you are currently working on?
I'm sorry, other what?
Is there another project that you are currently working on?
Oh, there's so many. Yes, that's the one that most readily comes to mind. I've just been thinking about it a lot. But, there's so many playwrights I really miss that have not been seen in Kansas City. Um, it was quite thrilling that the rep announced they're going to do the most beautiful play ever written that, has never been done in Kansas City, Cyrano de Bergerac, that premiered in 1897. But then they said it's the Martin Crimp adaptation. And it that's not really Cyrano. It's one of these. I think I kind of deplore that some theaters pretend to be doing the classics, but they're really doing people who, rather than writing something original, have taken a classic play and just given it their personal agenda, whether it's feminism or anti-capitalism or whatever it is they're doing, and then they use a classic as a vehicle because the title is familiar. They loosely use the plot, but it's for a contemporary agenda, and I don't want to exclude any idea from the theater. I think. But I don't think that should be done in place of doing the classics. I would like to see theaters that trust the classics on their own terms, rather than thinking they have to dumb them down for contemporary audiences, because audiences are not dumb. Look at the Shakespeare Festival. I mean, it does the plays with Heart of America Shakespeare Festival. It trusts material. It trusts the audience. You go and you see little kids. They don't know every single word they're hearing, but they can follow the story, and it's exciting. Sometimes we just need to hear language that is elevated above what we ordinarily hear in daily life. It's important to us to once in a while hear a word we don't know.
Yeah.
And so I think there's too much. That's one of the things I think is sad about contemporary theater, too much dumbing down, because they either don't trust the audience or they don't trust the original great play. Another diatribe, sorry.
No, it's okay. It's fascinating. Well, let's go ahead and pivot and talk about your book. One of your books, I should say, because you have multiple. But this is The Enchanted Years of the Stage, Kansas City at the Crossroads of American Theatre, 1870 to 1930.
I'm so glad to talk about it. Of all the books I've written, I think it's like 17 now. This is my absolute favorite. This is the best I've done. I might rival it with when I finish a book on French and American theater artists in World War I. but for now, Enchanted Years of the Stage is the book I am most proud of. Just for rescuing the information, because I spent months of going down to the Central Library and scrolling through all of those early newspapers and copying every reference to theater, and of course a lot of other things that I couldn't resist, because it was like time travel. It was like I could hardly wait to go down and be in 1870, whatever, and live that period while I was reading the newspapers. It was an amazing experience. And so to pull together that material that has been long forgotten, it's how many generations ago, so that it has not been passed down. I thought it was very important to bring that together. And of course, in a very anecdotal way, knowing that you can't always trust what you read in the newspapers. Newspapers, then as now, were published to sell copies rather than to always report the truth as objectively as possible. But even knowing that, I could glean a lot, and sometimes I just couldn't resist including an anecdote, even if I couldn't find a second source to verify it, because those anecdotes just tell you about the culture, the outlook, the way of life of the period, what people's concerns were, how they were thinking, how they were living. So it was fun to include some of those, even if they were only peripherally located, tied to theater. I mean, for example, day after day after day, I would read how many runaway horses there were downtown, which is often dangerous. But this is something I think it was that they had to live with, that if you're going to be traveling by horse, as long before automobiles, there were going to be times when a horse would get spooked and bolt and run away. So I had no idea that was a phenomenon of daily life until I started seeing it in the papers over and over again.
Yeah, not something you typically think about, but makes sense.
About the what?
The horse, you're right, it's not something you would typically think of, but
Right,
as you said, it's your only form of transportation,
right.
and it's
Yeah,
very easy to startle a horse.
yes. And another thing that struck me, it just gradually started to sink in after a long time, was how many actors came to perform in Kansas City and died here. Um, the famous ones were Eddie Foy and D. Wolf Hopper. They were both very famous in their day, and they both died in Kansas City. And then I was looking back on my book, and I saw that another one was a woman, an actress named Louisa Alcott. And, I think it was the bad water.
Mm.
In those days, we're talking about the 1880s, 90s, even lapping over a little into the 20th century. But in those days, if you weren't used to it, or if you know, drank water instead of beer once, you don't know what you were getting.
Right.
Upriver,
There's no
at,
water
yeah,
filter.
upriver in Leavenworth, where they would throw their diseased horses into the river.
Yep.
And, this was before we had purification plants. So that's speculation, though, to say, maybe it was our water that caused these actors to die after they performed in Kansas City. I'm just speculating, but that's a connection that occurred to me.
Well, yeah, I think you have a point, though. It's a very logical and possible supposition.
Yes.
So, while you were reading all of these old newspaper articles, and a fellow in your book that you mention quite often is Austin Latchaw. Is that how you say his name?
Oh, yes. That's what started the whole thing. Um, when I was working at, I don't know what I was, um, there was a short-lived journal called Cawsmouth. I think Carol Mickett pulled it together, or she was guest editor for an issue that she wanted to focus on culture in old Kansas City, and she asked me to write the article on theater. So I agreed to. I didn't know anything, or I didn't know much. I had been teaching American theater and learning what I could, but I was very excited to do that. And when I wrote that article, I focused on certain key personalities who had been important in the development of American theater. There was a crazy guy back named Valentine Love, who did the kind of shows for the Cowboys for a period, and I can't find out when he went bankrupt and went back to New York, and I cannot find out what happened to him later. He could well have changed his name, because Valentine Love was, of course, obviously a pseudonym. But at any rate, I wrote that article for Cawsmouth, and that kind of got me interested. And I think it was at that point that I discovered Austin Latchaw had written articles about Kansas City theater during his heyday in the 1880s to he died in around 1940. And he had originally been a drama critic for the theaters in the 1880s, and then in the 1930s he wrote a series of essays as a retrospective of his memories of Kansas City theater. And that series was called The Enchanted Years of the Stage. So I thought this should be republished. And I went to the editor of the Kansas City Star because they owned the Latshaw articles.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, would the Star like to republish the Latshaw articles as a book? And I would be the editor and add footnotes. And so they read some Latshaw article. No, nobody's going to read that. It's not in a style of writing that anybody reads today. It was 19th century writing that was kind of, a little bit more florid than the way we write today. So they passed up the idea. But he said, well, why don't you just write a book and draw on Latshaw's columns? And that's really what came about. Now, I ended up not just drawing on Latshaw, but on everything else I knew or could find. And as I say, all those months of just reading the newspaper to get what was going on in theater before Latshaw came to town in the 1880s, and other things that he didn't report on. Because he just did legitimate theater. He really didn't do the popular stuff. So it, little by little, there was more and more and more. It became a giant project. I would photocopy everything during my days at the newspaper reading machines at Kansas City Central Library. Just whole days. I wouldn't even stop for lunch. I would just take a little vitamin C drop to tide me over if I got tired, and I would just be lost in time from the moment the library opened until 5 o'clock, and then come home with pages and pages and pages of photocopies, and I would go over and underline in red and organize them by theater or topic or whatever. And I ended up with a wall of 4-inch binders of my research, which I have since donated to special collections in Miller Nichols Library at UMKC. And they have preserved it just as I gave it to them in the 4-inch binders. So everything is findable that I used. I'm very glad it's still there because someone could come in and use that material and write another book, and it would be quite different from mine. There's so much rich material there. It was just fascinating. Did I answer your question?
Yes, you did. And I kind of wish I knew that your original research was in the library. I would have gone and looked at it. Maybe in the future I will.
Yes, there's that. And now, totally off the subject, but for the last 3 years, I've been devoted to a project called K.C. Molière 420-22, the great French neoclassical comic playwright Molière, had his 400th birthday in 2022. So a bunch of us got together starting in 2018 to plan ahead. We formed a board and a nonprofit organization and had multiple activities. I was the president of the board. I should say the founder was Kip Niven, but he passed away in May of 2019. And luckily there were people who prodded me to keep it going. It was kind of distressing at the time, but they just said we needed to keep going, and we did. But we wanted to have awareness of Molière in every field, and serendipitously, Molière's 400th birthday coincided with Kansas City's 200th year of French settlement in Kansas City. So we had the 2 anniversaries simultaneously, almost within a couple of months, and of course Missouri statehood at the same time. So we managed to tie it all together with the Native American heritage, the Native American encounters with the French. We commissioned a Native American playwright, Philip Lual-Hooser, to write a play that would bring together Moliere's plays with the Chouteau family meeting the natives in what would later become Kansas City, and somehow bring it all together. And Philip was brilliant, the way he managed it. It's a very, very clever play called Tartuffanthrope. We had it performed at Kansas City's Celebration Day out at the Chouteau Park. It was July 24th of 2021. And then we did it again at the Ethnic Festival, a couple of months later. And it's available for school bookings, actually not through us anymore, since we dissolved the nonprofit after we got through the 3 years of celebrating Moliere. But we included education initiatives, a book club, Andre's pastry shop, Andre's Confiserie Suisse. They created a Moliere pastry. It was called the Moliere, and it was on sale at Andre's from the fall of 2021 until summer 2022, and it was very, very popular, and it with a beautiful label with Moliere's portrait on it. And then Doug Frost created a dessert wine called Joie de Molière, Joy of Moliere, and it had a beautiful Moliere label on it. That was in conjunction with Les Bourgeois Vineyards. Let's see, we had, I don't know how many universities did productions of Moliere. We had professional productions. There was an opera version of Tartuffe done by Landlocked Opera. Kansas City Actors Theatre did my translation of Moliere's Les Fâcheux. It was called The Pests. And we had so many. We published a Moliere coloring book, and just so many things. The constant activities. We had celebrations of Moliere's 398th and 399th birthdays. The latter had to be on Zoom because it was during the pandemic. And we commissioned, there were other translations that were done. The Unicorn did a couple of Moliere, one reading of translation and one Zoom of a new play about Moliere. So the accomplishments were just, it kind of boggles the mind that we did as much as we did. And then Chantal Roberts, who was on the board for a while, but she did all our newsletters, has published a book about the whole project. She called it a love story. Oh, here it is. It's called A Love Story, How the Heartland Fell in Love with a 400-year-old French comedic playwright. It's by Chantal Roberts, and it's available on Amazon. And I think it's been doing pretty well because it's full of color photographs. We wouldn't expect a book that costs $26 on Amazon to have that many color pictures. But anyway, that's a nice record. I think I started telling you all of this because, again, I developed a wall full of 3 and 4 inch binders full of materials on all these different subjects. And those have now been donated to special collections in the Miller Nichols Library at UMKC.
Well, that's amazing. Congrats on the success of all your hard work.
Oh, yes. I think we could have done even more if it hadn't been for the pandemic, because we wanted, and Kip was very strong about having a strong education component, and we all felt very strongly about that. We put teacher resources on our website, but my regret is that we didn't get school bookings for the play that Philip Lual-Hooser wrote. We tried everything we could, but teachers were burned out. Mm-hmm. They just couldn't. However, UMKC did what they called mobile Moliere. They had Stephanie Roberts directed a play she put together of scenes from Moliere, and that was the coterie helped us book it into schools. So it had 9 performances at different schools all over the Kansas City area. And that was very successful. I saw a couple of them. I saw the one out at Olathe South High School, a huge auditorium. And it was just exciting to see that. We should have had more of that kind of thing if it hadn't been for the pandemic.
Yeah. Pandemic really set a lot of folks back.
Yes. Yeah. So yes, we was in. Oh well, of course it culminated. Oh, I've forgotten some of the most important stuff. Of course, we culminated in the 400th birthday. Now, Moliere's birthday is January 15th, and we were ready to go on January 15th, 2022. We had rented Kirkwood Hall in the Nelson Atkins Museum of Art, and everything was ready to go. The volunteers, teams of volunteers, and the entertainment, and the cake for 400 people. We had all that planned out. And then Julian Zagatzagoitia, director of the Nelson Atkins, called me about 2 weeks before January 15th, and he said, we just couldn't do it on the 15th because of the pandemic. Half of the staff of the museum was out sick.
Mm-hmm.
And, people were still wearing masks at that time, January 2022. And he said we could still go ahead and do everything we wanted to do if we could plan another date. And he said February and March are off the table. April is probably off the table. So we looked for dates.
May is off the table. June's not good either.
To do as a secondary date, but it worked out beautifully because we could get the museum on May 1st, Sunday, putting it on a Sunday instead of a Saturday. But so we booked it for Sunday, May 1st, and we just kind of. I'm sorry, my bird clock, and I don't know how to silence it.
Okay.
But we had all these things in place, and in the notebooks, everything is all planned out, and we were able to have it on May 1st. With we booked the cake and the Moliere cakes for the gift bags and the gift bags for the presenters. We had. Everyone got 2 Moliere cakes, a bottle of Joie de Moliere wine, a Moliere coloring book, and a Moliere magnet, refrigerator magnet. I think there was something else I'm not remembering. But anyway, we had all of those. Anyway, it was a wonderful birthday party with cake for 400. And I think there were, I don't know, different people estimated how many people came, somewhere between 200 and 400. It was free. It was open to families. We had the little children from the Academy Lafayette. They stood around the birthday cake, and these were like kindergarten, 1st and 2nd grade. They stood around the birthday cake and sang Happy Birthday Moliere in French. It was one of my favorite moments to see those little tiny children singing Bon anniversaire Moliere, of course, licking their chops for the cake. But it was, and Mayor Sly James, former Mayor Sly James was one of our speakers. That was a great success. And in fact, I think it was better. I think fate was doing us a favor, because January 15th was a sudden snowstorm that really tied up a lot of traffic, and I think it would have hurt attendance. So it was really nice that, even though it wasn't on the actual birthday, we attracted many more people than we would have. And I know there were many people who were coming to the Nelson Atkins for the first time ever, and that was part of the goal. And best of all, in collaboration with the Alliance Française of Kansas City, that have been working with us all along so generously. They put us in every newsletter. We were able to get a leading French actor from the Comédie Française who wrote a one-man Molière play in French. And it cost, I can't tell you how many thousands of hours of woman power, as well as thousands of dollars from generous donors, but we did it. We brought in Jérôme Pouly from the Comédie Française, and he brought his costumes and he had the show ready, and we rented the Met Theater, the Warwick, where the Met Ensemble uses the Warwick on Main Street.
Mm-hmm.
And he did 2 shows there on the same weekend as the 400th birthday party. And it was the world premiere. And then the following summer, last summer, he toured that one-man Molière play all over France. But we, in Kansas City, did the world premiere.
That's awesome.
And Kansas City was written up in lots and lots of French newspapers. And that was part of it, because we have world-class theater in Kansas City, and the rest of the world doesn't know it. In fact, a lot of Kansas City doesn't know it. But we were written up in Le Monde and other French newspapers. And it really helped with Jérôme Pouly coming in. And not only that, but he got his friends at the Comédie Française to make a little video about him coming to Kansas City, and was he going to meet Molière and so on. I mean, they pretended to be ignorant. Yeah, it was very funny video. I think it's still online somewhere. It's in French, but with English subtitles. And about videos, I should say, we also had a major film artist, Johnny Rice, who did 2 pro bono videos for us. First, he did a 3-minute promo video that we sent to France and, different news outlets, and showed a lot. And that, it was on our website. And that was just promoting the birthday and some of the things going on. And then later, they did another longer video kind of summarizing our activity to show at the 400th birthday. I think there was so much going on at the birthday party, not many people saw it, which is a shame, because it's a really nice summary of what we accomplished with a lot of the people who had participated in this huge undertaking.
Yeah, that sounds like a lot of work, especially getting the actor and coordinating with everyone in France.
Oh, it was. I can't tell you. Basically, for 3 years, I was doing Molière 24/7. It was. I would just start in the morning, and it would be all about Molière all day long at my laptop, or when I had to go out and do something elsewhere. But and then I was still back at it in the evening. I do send a lot of emails. Maybe I'm a little wordy, as you can tell from the way I'm talking and taking it over. But it was a constant. And I had other scholarly projects, more scholarly things to do, but I just put them on the back burner and said, I can't look at these things for now. We'll get through Molière, and then I'll get back to what I was working on.
I understand that. I've had a few projects like that. But I want to reassure you, don't feel like you're talking too much. I love it when my guests talk a lot.
Oh, thank you.
In comparison then to the Molière project, how much work went into the book?
Yeah, that was longer ago, and it was a different type of work. It was actually more the type of work I enjoy, which was more just the research, the learning, and the pulling ideas together, and the delicious quotations, and just kind of immersing myself in another time. And you might say that Kansas City of the 1860s to 1920s was another place. So that was like a pleasure trip. It was like time travel. And even the actual writing, when I hunkered down to write, and I was enjoying the writing. The Moliere business, just doing business emails and trying to think of the different things we had going and, trying to keep all the loose ends together. It was more like hard work. It was sometimes when something seemed not to be working, when I couldn't get a response from someone and I needed to know because like other things depended on it, and one thing depended on the next, and this person wasn't responding. I had a lot of dark nights of the soul over Moliere.
I've had a lot of projects like that as well. I have a project at work that's been like that. Guys, I need you to answer this email. It's been 2 weeks.
Yes. Yes, in so many ways, working alone is easier than, trying to, oversee 11 different committees plus a board. Now, the board was wonderful. I just can't tell you what a great board we had. They were so good. They were so responsive, and they all took on so much. It was a just wonderful board. Especially Don Dagenet, the vice president, who replaced Sarah Ingram Iser after she passed away, and Jim Weitzel, our treasurer, and Rebecca Smith, our secretary. They worked so hard. They just brought so many things to perfection. I was just so lucky, so lucky. And Jennifer Martin, who oversaw all of the higher education and got so many of these different colleges and universities to do Moliere productions. So Kip and I had put together a list of all the colleges and universities, the theater departments and the French departments from, halfway across Kansas and halfway across Missouri. Well, we gave that list of names and phone numbers to Jennifer Martin, and she and Michelle Leon also. They contacted every one of those, and then many of them they got to agree to do productions of Moliere in the following season. And they were delightful. The board and I went around and saw most of them. We missed a couple because they were too close to the birthday party, and we just couldn't. Mm-hmm. So yes, having good people, that was the working with those people, plus Cyprien Simkowitz, who was also just invaluable, and Catherine Tissot, the president of the Alliance Française. That was the fun part. That was the pleasure of working with such wonderful people. But just being tied so much to the laptop and sending and receiving emails, not so much.
Yeah, that can really wear on you. Well, I have a couple more questions here about your book. So you loved the research, which is great. I love doing research. What, while you were researching this book, is the most surprising piece of information you came across?
The Enchanted Years of the stage. Yes, thank you for bringing us back to the subject at hand, because that was a great joy. I think, I don't know, there's so much that was fun, interesting, surprising. What was not surprising was how neatly Kansas City fit into the larger history of American theater of that period. There were so many things that were done everywhere, like how the earliest theaters were just the second floor on top of a commercial building. So you have a grocery store or dry goods store at sidewalk level, and then you go up a flight of stairs and there's an open room that the community could use for meetings, balls, or dances, obviously not balls, but they called them the balls, but and plays from touring groups. And they were pretty rudimentary. Sometimes, you had to erect a backstage so that people could cross over, be out of view of the audience. But that was fairly standard. Kansas City and all the way across the country I suppose the biggest surprise, happy surprise, was Mr. Abraham Judah. Judah, Judah. Mr. Judah, the beloved Mr. Judah, came to Kansas City. He had been in tailoring, fabric business. I think he was from Cleveland. It's been a while since I wrote the book, and I'm hazy on details. But he somehow got into the theatrical presentation business. He put together a freak show, which is kind of common. The bearded lady, and it was mostly fake, of course.
Mm-hmm.
But the man with the rubber band skin, and the people who paid admission were allowed to snap his skin like a rubber band, that kind of thing. But he started out that way on 9th Street. He later built a cyclorama because panoramas were popular in the 1880s, 1890s. But his heyday was when he was the manager of the Grand Opera House at 7th and Walnut. And he ran that as a popular price theater, which meant that the audience paid lower admission prices. And yet he was able to book top stars who you'd think it was beneath their dignity to play at a popular price house, but they loved Mr. Judah, and they would play the Grand Opera House instead of the Coates or the Gillis or one of the others, because just for the joy of being booked by him. He was generous. When he died and they opened his safe, it was full of IOUs from actors.
Oh, wow.
He was just an amazing person. I visited his grave several times in he's in Elmwood, or he's in Mount Washington. Elmwood. Yeah, he's in Elmwood Cemetery. His partner, Mill Hudson, Hudson, who ran the Coates Opera, was the most successful manager of Coates Opera House, and later was a partner with Mr. Judah. But Mill Hudson is buried in Mount Washington Cemetery, the two greats of Kansas City theater history. And then there was the amazing George Warder, who built the Warder Grand at 9th and Holmes. And his story is poignant. It's all fascinating.
Is there anything that you didn't, let me rephrase this. Because you did so much research, I'm sure that there's a lot of little things that you didn't include. But is there any major person or topic that didn't make it into the book?
Well, I didn't get into the later variety theaters that became movie theaters. I mean, they're sort of mentioned, but I just didn't really get into them. I cut it off at 1929 because, it's kind of an obvious cutoff point, but theater was for a while, at that time it was being overtaken by these newfangled inventions, the motor car, the silent film, the phonograph record player. So theater started to have a low period in the 30s and 40s. So I really cut it off there, but maybe there's some architectural theaters of transition that I didn't include, but I did include the major ones. And I did put in a lot of what was innovative about each of them, whether originally they were gas, and then a combination of gas and electricity because they didn't trust electricity. So they had the gas as a backup. And some of them later converted fully to electricity. Yes, what I wish we could have saved the Grand Opera House, because when I moved to Kansas City, Grand Opera House was still standing at 7th and Walnut. And it had been, the reason it was saved was because the walls were so thick they were able to put in a concrete ramp inside and use it for a car park, a downtown rental space car park.
That sounds like a travesty.
It is, and they took off the tower and just took out all the woodwork and the decoration and everything else, but it saved the architecture. And then one morning, I woke up one Sunday morning and read the Kansas City Star that Grand Opera House was set to be demolished. And I became, for the first time in my life, an activist. Calling everyone I knew. Hal and Wilda Sandy were great preservationists. They wrote the book on one of the cemeteries. And anyway, and Jonathan Kemper helped gather a group and architecture and architects. And what could we do to save it? To me, what should have been done, they would never have been fight. Again, I can imagine things that cost too much money, but it would never have been financially feasible. But what it should have been was to restore the interior, partly to something like a theater, and partly make it into a theater museum. Because how many theater museums do we have in the United States? Hardly any, whereas any great city in Europe has a theater museum. And then the rooftop should have been a rooftop garden, restaurant, cabaret with the view of the confluence of the Missouri and the Kaw rivers. So, wouldn't that have been fabulous?
That does sound really fabulous.
But the owner of the building was worried about, first they were paying insurance, and they were afraid the bricks would fall out and hit somebody, and it was just the cost was too much. It was a liability just to have it sitting empty when somebody deemed it was unsafe for cars. Well, I went inside of it twice. Once when it was still a car park. I went inside and just walked up the inside ramp and took photos of the inside, the brick walls, the old wooden ladder up to the loft with the machinery was still there on the wall. But of course I couldn't climb it. The bottom of the ladder had been sawed off far above my head. But I got, pictures of the rafters and that kind of thing. But then when I saw the news story and we got permission I was teaching American theater history that semester, luckily, and got permission to take the class inside the building. And I was responsible for any liability, which is pretty scary because some of them did go up that wooden ladder up to the loft on the wooden rafters. And then we went down into the sub-basement where the boiler room was standing in water. You saw the rusted boiler half submerged and the old electrical boxes. And I had a student, Jean Birch, who took fabulous photographs of every little detail. I always take a lot of photos, but hers were really, really good. So we have a complete documentary record. Now, I did not go up in the loft, but the students did and looked around up there, and they said that something obviously was missing, that there was a place where there was something seemed to have been lowered. Well, it turned out, I found out quite a bit later, that a Kansas City councilman had gone in and rescued the curtain wheel.
Oh,
it was
wow.
a giant wooden wheel that would turn with a winch, a rope around it to lift the curtain of several tons of curtain. And he had gone up into the loft and cut out the floor so that the curtain wheel could be lowered onto the back of a truck and then driven out through a car wash to wash off the pigeon dung. And then he put it in his garage. So he called me and I got to see it and take a lot of pictures of it with some tech students from the theater department. We got a lot of pictures, but we couldn't figure out how to save it. The rep didn't want it in the lobby. They thought it would be a liability. And there was no Kansas City museum to take it. I'm sorry to say, I do not know whatever happened to it. I don't think the councilman still has it in his garage. I think he was looking for a museum to take it. There is a theater museum in Iowa that might have taken it. I just don't know.
What about all the photographs, though?
Oh, I have PowerPoints. I have endless PowerPoints of Kansas City Theater, one for each theater. And different themes, and I have Jean Birch's photographs. Yes.
That's cool. That sounds very similar to the Folly, except that the Folly, they were actually able to save it.
Yes, the Folly. I was going to work with the Folly, but they didn't get the grant. They wanted to do an interactive lobby display of Folly theater history. Oh, it might happen eventually in the future, where the audience members could stand in the lobby and press different buttons and see different documents. So I was going to help with that.
That's cool.
That has a fascinating history too, and of course, designed by Kansas City's greatest architect, Louis Curtis.
Yes.
So maybe sometime eventually that will happen, but they sure did a nice job of the remodeling. We have to be so grateful that Joan Dillon saved that building. It was right about the time I came to Kansas City in 1978.
Mm-hmm.
That the Folly was endangered. It might have been torn down, but a woman named Joan Dillon spearheaded an effort to raise the money to save it and make it into a theater again.
I didn't have any other questions prepared. Is there anything else you wanted to tell us about?
Oh my goodness, I wouldn't know where to start. We talked about Colonel Kersey Coates and Coates Opera House. Colonel Coates, of course, was Kansas City's great entrepreneur, and he was not personally a theater person, but he put the money. He thought Kansas City needed an opera house. Before him, theater was touring companies in those second-story halls above commercial. And so he put the money in to build our very first respectable theater, and that was Coates Opera House. It was catty corner from where Coates Hotel still exists. Not the same hotel; it had burned down and been restored, but it was there at what is the address on 10th and Broadway.
Mm-hmm.
But we have to be grateful that he did, and his wife was very cultivated. She loved culture. She loved to bring artists to Kansas City. She was a very genteel lady from Pennsylvania, and I loved visiting Colonel Coates's grave in it's been a while, in Elmwood. I've been there a couple times, but it's way off. You have to walk quite a ways, and then when you find it, it's there's a huge base, and then there's something like a sarcophagus on posts, or you might say a bathtub on little posts, little legs, short legs above that. And one time when I was there, in that space between the base and then the upper sarcophagus with his name on it,
Mm-hmm.
somebody had wired in a wine glass with red wine in it. So, that really warms the heart when people, all these 200 years later, remember the importance of our ancestors, the people who built the things we enjoy today. It was not easy for them. It was not easy for Colonel Coates to get that theater. I mean, basically running that theater, the first decade came out of his pocket,
Mm-hmm.
To bring culture to Kansas City. But he did it, and it lasted until it burned down. It opened in 1870 and burned down in 1900. And 30 years of culture, and all the great stars, almost all. I could name a couple who never made it, but who came to Kansas City. There's so many good stories. Read my book. I would tell everyone.
I'm telling them all to read the book. Hold on, I had a point and I just forgot it.
Yeah.
Something about the fire. Yeah. So many of the early theater houses burned down, and I couldn't figure out if it was we just don't have good fire prevention and good system to deal with it, or if it's specifically a theater issue.
Theaters did have a bad habit of burning down in the late 19th century, and usually it was because it was gas lighting before electricity, and it was often open flames, that were controlled from a board somewhere, with colored gauze in front of them to give color, and then the gas could be raised or lowered for the intensity. But sometimes scenery would get too close to one of those flames. That was what happened at the Iroquois Theater fire in Chicago in 1902. So that was one of the reasons that they often had fires, and that's probably the main reason. They learned to prevent as best they could. They would often, some theaters had firemen ready, or people knew. Some theaters, like the Folly, had gentlemen could smoke inside the theater during a performance.
Mm-hmm.
When it was a burlesque house, the air was thick with cigar smoke. But little by little, asbestos curtains were developed, and that didn't help in the case of the Iroquois Theater fire. That theater was supposed to be absolutely fireproof. It had a tank of water on the ceiling. But that was the worst fire disaster since the Richmond, Virginia fire of 1830s, I don't know. Horrible, horrible fire. And I think a lot of Chicagoans, 4 generations later, still know about it.
I actually did come across the Iroquois during my research. I don't remember specifically which theater I was researching that it came up, but it might have been the Opera House fires.
The Warder Grand burned down and was replaced with the Auditorium Theater at 9th and Holmes. The Gillis had a major fire. I think that was after it had been converted to cinema, but it was there was the way. I think they used a carbon arc. I'm not sure. I don't remember. What else? The Coates house burned down because the boiler overheated. 1900. There had been a performance, and people had said it's really hot tonight inside the theater. The boiler had been working overtime. Well, luckily the theater had cleared. Most of the actors had changed and gone back to their hotel for the night. There were 2 actors who were very slow at changing. And when the night watchman came and said, "You've got to clear out, there's a fire," and they didn't have time to save anything because their theatrical trunks were kept at the theater, and they carried a little carpet bag across the street to the hotel if they were staying at the Coates House Hotel.
Mm-hmm.
And they just had to rush out without thinking, and they had to bang on the lobby doors, and the doors were broken down. And anyway, they got out. Luckily, the play had not been Hamlet 4 hours. Luckily, it had been a 3-hour play, or could have been a much worse disaster. But the next morning, Coates Opera House was just rubble and ashes.
Yeah,
just completely demolished. And this was in winter. And everybody said, "Well, our beloved Coates House, of course we're going to rebuild it. Of course we have to have Coates Opera House at 9th and Broadway." 9th and Broadway, 10th and Broadway. And, but it never was rebuilt. We had the Gillis by then, Gillis Opera House at 5th and Main, is it? No.
I'm not good with addresses. I don't know.
There's even a plaque on the outside. And by then, we had the Warder Grand. So, and then the next big theater that was built was the Willis Wood, that only lasted, that was at 11th and Baltimore, and that only lasted about 15 years, and that was a high-priced theater, very, very expensive theater. That was the one that had a tunnel under the street to the bar of the Baltimore Hotel, so that people at intermission could go through the tunnel under the street and have an intermission drink at the hotel without having to put their coats on.
There was a rumor of that at another of the theaters. And um, now I'm not certain if I remember reading that on the Folly or another theater. But like it's a common thing when you look it up even today. They're like, "Oh yeah, there was a tunnel," but there's no architectural evidence of it. So I wonder if
Oh, yes,
somehow
they're
it just
down.
got transferred from the
Those
Willis.
tunnels are still down there. I have not been in one, I'm sad to say, but there was one at Ninth Street that members of the Kansas City Historical Foundation have been in. I wasn't able to go that day. And they're lined with tile, but they're blocked off because it's dangerous.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and they've been used for storage and things. But yes, the one catty corner across from the Willis Woods, I guess it was directly across from, trying to imagine, to the Baltimore Hotel. That was used a lot during those times. And it too was tile lined, and it was lit. And then later, after Willis Wood burned down, then the tunnel was blocked off.
Mm.
And I don't know. I haven't heard any reports of that. Anyone getting a chance to look at that one. I suppose some city fathers know how to do that.
Yeah, I'm sure somebody has to.
Yes, yes.
Oh, I do remember. I actually did have one more thing I wanted to talk to you about. So you've spent all this time talking about these legitimate theaters versus some of what they were at the time considered, lowbrow theater. All the people associated, the actors, the playwrights, the theater managers. But then you have a chapter where you talk about the priest of Pallas,
Oh, yes.
and it just seems slightly out of context. In the book, you describe why you've included it, but I was wondering if you could talk about that a little bit more.
Yes, it was just too fascinating, and part of the great entertainment complex, you might say, representative of the kind of culture the general population was aware of. Why named priest of Pallas? Um, well, I mean, in homage to Pallas Athena, the Greek goddess of wisdom. And basically, it was a very commercial. It was a harvest festival intended to draw people to Kansas City when the farmers were selling their harvest, and the weather was usually pretty good. And if they brought people to Kansas City from Nebraska and Kansas and Iowa, it was good for the city. The hotels made money, and so on. And the Priests of Pallas Parade developed out of that. It lasted for many years, and then there was a hiatus, but then it popped up again, and we even had a couple of examples that I went to in Union Station. I don't remember what year, in the 2010s maybe. Um, it started when the parade was horse-drawn floats, and each float had a theme, and the overall Piece of Palace Parade of each year had a theme. And ladies would ride on the floats, elaborately costumed. People would line the streets for the whole length of the parade. And in theaters, if people had attended a performance that night, they would actually stop the show when the parade was approaching the block with the theater located, so that the audience could run down to look out, get on the sidewalk, or look out the front windows of the theater to watch the parade go by, and then they would go back to their seats and watch the rest of the play. Later, the floats were done by trolleys, electrical. And
I thought that part was very interesting in your book.
Yes, that we had trolleys way back when. For 4 years, they published sets of 15 postcards each year showing the floats. And I have at great length, great expense, collected all 4 sets.
Nice.
All 15 postcards in 4 different sets. Quite wonderful depictions. And for even earlier, I have a big souvenir booklet from the 1890s.
That's very cool.
Yeah.
I've been fascinated by the Priest of Pallas since I came across it a few years ago when I started the podcast, actually.
Oh, did you
And I
get to
think
go
it's
to?
really funny that if it's a harvest festival, we chose the goddess of wisdom and not the goddess of the
Yes,
harvest.
yes. Oh, it was wonderful. When we had, it was so community spirited. The Great Hall of Union Station was full, and everyone was dressed up, wearing masks, and it was so festive. And as they did in the olden days, there was a souvenir of the occasion that said "Priest of Pallas." In the olden days, they would send them around to the houses of everybody who had booked tickets for Priests of Pallas. And I have quite a collection of those things too. A candlestick and a pencil holder. And in 1906, I have a lot of the little enamel dishes from 1906. And the flower vase and a mirror and a thermometer and a calendar holder. And they're all quite charming. They're cheap, they're not silver. They look silver, but they're just made of cheap tin, but in Art Deco style. So I don't have a complete collection, but it's pretty good.
That sounds pretty good. All right. Well, I think we'll wrap it up. I'm sure you're getting a little bit tired at least.
Oh, I hope I haven't gone too long, but
No. I loved it. I just thought your voice is probably getting tired. Mine would after an hour.
Fun to talk about all these things. Thank you very much for the opportunity.
Thank you so much for joining me. All right. Bye, y'all.
Bye.
Hey, I just wanted to take a moment and say thank you for supporting me. I hope you enjoyed this episode and all the other Patreon content at your disposal. Please make sure you are liking, following, subscribing to me on all the social medias. That's Facebook, Instagram, Pinterest, Tumblr, and Twitter. I do not have a TikTok and no plans to get one at this time. Also, like and subscribe to my YouTube channel. We're going to work on growing that this year. Make sure to rate and review me anywhere you listen, but especially on Apple Podcasts. Makes it easier for other people to find me. Visit my website for additional information. That's homegrownkc.wordpress.com. Yes, my website is still under construction. We're just going to go ahead and say it will always be under construction at this point. Sign up for my newsletter at my website. You'll get an email once a month that says, here's what's new, here's what's going on with the podcast, keep you up to date. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, you can email me at homegrownkcpodcast@gmail.com. DM me on any of my social media sites, or you can send me a message here on Patreon. For additional merchandise, visit zazzle.com/store/homegrown_KC_store. That's zazzle.com/store/homegrown_KC_store. Thank you goes out to my talented sister-in-law, Sarah McCombs, for the creation of my logo. To the Dear Misses for the use of their song Kansas City as the intro and outro music of the show. To local libraries which enabled me to gather all my research. And to you. Thanks for listening. Cheers.
Seem to shake this feeling, and I can't seem to get you off my mind. Thought I lost my nerve.